Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for your patience. I just drove back in from Calgary this morning, where I had a constructive meeting with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. But there's still several issues in which there's some distance between the federal and provincial governments, such as the impact of the federal carbon tax and its cascading impacts on inflation, affordability, and sustained higher interest rates, as well as the timeline to reach carbon neutrality, which we have set a target of 2050. I reiterated the growing opposition to the federal carbon tax, which includes 7 premiers, federal members of parliament, and everyday Albertans and Canadians. I went as far as to suggest to the Prime Minister that he could achieve a win if he listened to the growing calls against the carbon tax and reversed his decision to increase the tax, which will amount to about a 23% increase on April 1st. We also talked about Alberta's energy industry and various energy projects, as well as Alberta's commitment to achieving carbon neutrality by 2050, and how we are a willing partner in a responsible and manageable effort to see that goal through. We discussed how the province and the federal government have indeed worked together to see several projects start up and progress, from companies including Air Products with their net zero hydrogen, Dow Chemical with their net zero petrochemical, and Heidelberg, which is moving towards a final investment decision on net zero cement. And I highlighted the importance of projects that will move the province and the country forward on carbon neutrality, including the Pathways Alliance project, which is awaiting the federal budget to see if Ottawa will give more clarity around various aspects of support for it. I also relayed to the Prime Minister the massive opportunity that Alberta has to export ammonia to South Korea and Japan in cooperation with British Columbia, and I expressed the hope that the federal government would be a partner in this work. I also expressed gratitude for the progress on the Trans Mountain Pipeline and how I'm encouraged by the federal conversations taking place about replicating the highly successful Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation and our loan guarantee program, as Indigenous leaders across the country have also praised Alberta for leading the way on economic reconciliation and for being an example that should be followed. I note that British Columbia just recently announced their own IOC program that is modeled after ours, and we look forward to working with the federal government should they ask us to assist with developing a national program. And lastly, I highlighted Alberta's plans to collaborate further with First Nations on issues such as mental health and addiction, infrastructure and housing. In closing, I do want to say that Alberta will remain a willing partner when given the opportunity to do so. There are many ways that the province can cooperate with Ottawa that do not involve the federal government overstepping its constitutional authority, and Alberta will continue to advocate for solutions that will benefit Albertans and all Canadians. And with that, I'd be happy to take your questions.
Thank you.
A different topic. This week, Nenshi entered the NDP leadership race. He had some strong words about you. Said he's known you for 30 years, you were in school together, but he said your government is not just incompetent, but immoral and dangerous. So do you have any comment about him jumping in and then his rhetoric towards you?
Well, look, there's a lot of candidates in the NDP leadership race, and I'll do what I have always done with leftist politicians. I will debate them on policy and on our records, then I'll trust that Albertans will decide which party better reflects their values and their priorities. That's what we did in the last election. That's what we will do in the next election. But I would say that I'm quite happy to stand on our record. We've balanced the budget twice. We've stood up for Albertans against the clean electricity regs, methane emissions cap, oil production cap. We're leading the country in job creation, 17,400 more jobs last month alone. We're leading on venture capital investment, $707 million in venture capital funding. We're creating the Alberta Hydrogen Centre of Excellence. We provided affordability payments to Albertans. We're building 141 schools. 98 of them are in process. We're building important infrastructure like the Red Deer Hospital and the standalone stollery. So that's why I am always proud and happy to stand and run on our record. I don't know that the NDP candidates are always proud and happy to run on theirs. I don't even think they know what they want to be at the end of their leadership contest. So as soon as they choose their leader and decide what they want to be, whether they want to be the NDP or some other version of it, I'd be more than happy to talk about policy.
Jason Nixon, for example, was comparing him to Stalin yesterday. So even though you don't want to get into name-calling each other, will you tell your ministers not to do the same thing, or is it fair game to?
You know, I would have to say that that there have been a number of politicians who've been in politics for a long time and have their own relationships with some of the candidates, and so I'll let them make their own judgment about how they feel they want to engage and what they want to say about it. So I let my caucus members have their own opinions.
Thanks, Graham. And I was trying to say one question, one follow-up today. So starting here in the room, we'll go to you next, Lisa. Premier, did you come to any agreements or make any movement towards any agreements with the Prime Minister in your meeting this morning?
One of the things that we both agreed is that the tables that we've set up with our officials are working very well. So I would say that we have some very, we've got common cause for sure on the issue of hydrogen and how to be able to get that as the new fuel of the future to the market. I did make him aware that we have a sense of urgency around the issue of resolving issues around ammonia, because the Japanese are going to be going to an RFP for a 20-year supply in the coming months, and we want to be able to participate in that. It would be nice to have the federal government weigh in and offer some support for that. We also and I knew this before from my last meeting with him, is that we are talking about small modular reactors. And as you saw, Capital Power has just inked a deal with OPG so that we can potentially go forward and start working around the permitting on that. And we have many projects that we work in common with. I met on the weekend with Francois-Philippe Champagne to talk about some of the areas where we're able to work together. He was instrumental in helping us to get to the finish line on Air Products and Dow Chemical, as well as Heidelberg and de Havilland. So I think there's many ways in which we can work constructively together. And so I do try to focus on the positive. Obviously, I let him know that I don't have as great a relationship as one of his other ministers, or with one of his other ministers. And I expressed my desire in person that if he chose to make a change in that portfolio, I'd be happy to have a reset in our relationship on that front. But we're going to work on the things that we can work together on.
And I'm hoping to get some clarity on the Pharmacare issue. This morning, the Prime Minister commented a little bit about that. He said that you talked about it. Mm-hmm. He said that you said currently about 25% of people in Alberta don't have coverage. He wants to work with Alberta to fill those gaps, particularly with contraceptives and diabetes supplies. Mm-hmm. But on the weekend, on your radio show, you said that you suggested the National Pharmacare Program would essentially force Albertans off of the provincial plan, and that it would compromise their provincial coverage that you talked about it being very robust. Did you get some clarity on that today, on what the federal government is going to do and how you're going to work with them on the Pharmacare path? I
told him that the area we need to work on is the number of Albertans that aren't covered by any plan at all. And the numbers I received from my officials, I think it is more of an estimate, is that 76% of Albertans are covered by one type of program or another, whether it's a private plan or whether it's a program that we offer through Alberta Blue Cross, or the coverage that we offer with seniors, those on age and those with disabilities. But it does, I think, leave us both concerned that there are 26% of people who don't have coverage, and at any given time, a percentage of those are going to need pharmaceutical support. They can come onto our plan at any time because we do have non-group coverage as well. But I think trying to work together so that we can expand the program so that we have full coverage is something I'd like to work toward. And I know with the Quebec approach, this is something I've asked my health minister to look into. It is in Quebec, they have a robust competitive market, but they also have a requirement that you have to have health insurance. And if you don't, at the end of the year through the tax system, they end up charging you essentially a premium for the coverage that you're defaulted into. I don't know if that's the kind of thing that the federal government is looking for. It is the kind of approach that Quebec has taken, but it does ensure that everybody has 100% coverage. So if we can work together on having 100% coverage of the 5,000 drugs that we currently cover, and then expand the formularies across the country so that there is some consistency, I think we can find some common ground on that. But I don't want anyone to think that what's put on the table is a universal first dollar coverage on all types of treatments, because it's not. It really does just cover two types of treatments. And so if we can find a way to be a bit more comprehensive and expand the coverage out, we'll certainly be prepared to work with them on it.
We'll go to Jonathan, then we'll go to Brianna.
Jonathan Bradley, Western Standard. The media notice for your meeting did include that many details. Who requested the meeting?
I heard yesterday he was coming to town. And last time, I was surprised that he didn't request a meeting. He said it was my job to request a meeting. So I requested a meeting, and he accommodated me. I went down last night, and we met at 8:30 this morning.
Okay, my follow-up is, you mentioned that Trudeau hasn't decided whether or not he's going to pause the hike on the carbon tax. Where do you stand on using the Alberta Sovereignty Act to respond to the carbon tax hike?
We just don't have the ability to do that. I've seen what has happened in Saskatchewan, for instance. They have the full authority through their crown corporations to be the sole marketer of natural gas. That's not the way our market works. We're a competitive market, and I certainly wouldn't be asking any private sector companies to break the law and not remit their taxes. So I think the important thing is for the federal government to recognize that there is a cascading effect that happens, that when you increase the carbon tax, because the rebate doesn't go to small businesses, those prices end up getting raised to be able to cover that tax, which then fuels inflation. And then with inflation being so high, we're hearing the Bank of Canada can't reduce rates, which causes people to have higher rates when they go to renew their mortgages. So I did make that case, and I guess we'll wait and see on April 1st whether or not I and the other premiers are successful.
Premier, it sounds, in response to Lisa's question, like you're now willing to work with the feds on the Pharmacare deal. When weeks ago, your health minister automatically ruled it out. Was that a mistake? And now that you have some more details, for her to say that we're opting out completely before any of these details actually come to light?
Well, we're certainly not only going to offer a two-drug plan. Like, that is not what we offer in Alberta, and I don't want people to think that a two-condition plan is a universal system. It's not. But if they want to work with us to help in expanding our robust program that already exists to cover more people, then we'd be happy to do that, because our drug plan already covers 50 different types of birth control contraception. It also covers, I believe, 16 types of insulin drugs, including 9 products. And so we feel like we have a pretty robust plan. So we wouldn't want to offer something that was less than that. And if there's a way for us to expand it out working together, that would make far more sense than having a parallel program.
On the carbon tax, it's not new that Alberta is in opposition to this. Did you get any indication today that there could be any movement before April 1st, or is this sort of just a thing that we have to keep on saying that we don't?
We're in lobbying mode right now because we're coming up on the decision, which will be on April the 1st. And as you saw, even Liberal Premier Andrew Furey announced yesterday that he believes that there should be a pause on the increase as well. So I think this would be the time for people to call the federal government, call their MPs, and put some pressure on them, because I do believe that if we're really concerned about affordability and inflation, that the tax is too high. And going up another $15, which would be 23% increase on the current amount that people are paying, I just don't think they can afford it.
Shane?
Yeah, taking it to a totally different topic, asking you about the proposed trans policies. According to a Freedom of Information request, your office received thousands of letters in the weeks following your proposed announcements. Those in support thanked you for protecting the rights of parents and children, calling it common sense, but there was also significant concern. Some called on you to rescind the policies. Others expressed concerns about consultation, government involvement in medical decisions, misinformations, and the safety and well-being of LGBTQ2S+ Albertans. In over 2 weeks, your office received over 12,000 letters titled "Protect Students, Withdraw the Regressive Policy," yet you have said several times that you believe Albertans support these policies. What are you basing that belief on?
Look, I mean, we are going to make sure that any individual who is transitioning is supported. That was the starting point, is that I'm concerned that there are gaps in the medical coverage, that we don't have the surgeries available here, we don't have proper surgical aftercare, and that there are sometimes difficulties getting the lifelong medical support needed to be able to support somebody who's on hormone therapy. And then the question was, at what point should these decisions be made? And I must tell you, the developing international evidence is that there's no consensus on this. What we're seeing, if you saw in the UK, their National Health Service just announced that they would not be offering puberty blockers to young people under the age of 18 because they feel that the potential risks and harms have not been studied, and that the risk is too great. So when we look at that, we have to look at the broader international picture and see what the evolving evidence is. The UK, many of the Nordic countries, they're taking a different approach. We want to be cautious. We want to make sure that children are making these decisions when they're old enough to understand the consequences, because we are talking about sterility. Let's be frank about it. If you stop the process of puberty and then you do cross-sex hormones and you don't become sexually mature, you can't have children. And so we have to decide at what age a child should make that decision. And from the feedback that we've gotten from those who are in the field, from looking at the international evidence, we just don't feel comfortable that that would be the age 15 and under. We have agreed that we'd believe that children who have good medical care, psychological support and supportive family can start that when they're 16. And I think that increasingly is going to be supported by the international evidence.
You mentioned the international evidence, but how do you know that this is what Albertans want? And on that note, would you commit to polling Albertans to find out if they do, in fact, support these policies and release those findings?
Well, look, when you're talking about lifelong decisions about whether or not a person is going to take an action that's going to result in their sterility and they're a child, I think there comes a point where you do have to be looking at what the international evidence shows. And if we're seeing in other jurisdictions that there's concern about the long-term impact of puberty blockers, and there's concern about prematurely having young people make these decisions, then I think we have to be mindful of that. Our job is to make sure that kids can make adult decisions as adults and that they don't end up making a decision prematurely that will cut off their choices.
Thanks, Shane. We'll go to Emmanuel.
Yeah, on the Pharmacare plan, just so I understand correctly, your position is that Alberta should opt out of this federal plan, but also offer a public plan that would cover diabetes, contraception, Plan B, and more?
We already have a public plan, yes.
And you
It
would
offers
wanna-
5,000. It offers 5,000 different types of drugs. There's a category for seniors, category for AISH and disabilities, and there's also what we call a non-group plan, which is available to anyone who does not have coverage through their employers. There are people who have chosen not to opt into that plan, and so if we can work with the federal government to get more people covered, we'd be happy to. But we want to make sure that it's a comprehensive plan that covers all conditions that we currently offer under our program.
And on the carbon tax, Newfoundland Premier announced this morning that he was also opposed to the carbon tax hike. I think there's only Manitoba left in the provinces that are concerned by this federal carbon tax.
And British Columbia, I think, because British Columbia has their own provincial carbon tax.
But of the provinces that are concerned, do you plan on doing some kind of Premiers United Front on that, meetings, so to the federal government?
I think we kind of are. We're tweeting and retweeting each other. I'm hoping to be able to touch base with Premier Fury when he's in Alberta this week. I was hoping to be able to see him, but he's going to be in Calgary. I'm going to be in Edmonton, so we might end up missing. But I think that those actions speak very loudly, that 7 premiers from different political perspectives are all coming together to say that there needs to be a pause on this tax. And so I'm hopeful that the Prime Minister will listen to that.
Thank you. We'll head over to the phones now. Operator, can you put through the first caller, please?
Chris Marco, Calgary Herald. Hi, Premier. You mentioned in your remarks about the Pathways Alliance Oil Sands project. What was your message to the Prime Minister about the carbon capture project? And was there any sign of progress from the Prime Minister on Ottawa reaching agreement with the Pathways Alliance on the CCUS hub?
Well, I did tell him that what my officials have told me, that our pore space is so expansive, it could, in theory, be able to sequester all the emissions that have already been produced by man. That gives you some idea of how large our pore space capacity is. And this project in particular would abate a significant amount of Canada's global emissions, 67 megatons, I believe. And there's a willing partner in the alliance to do so. I also told him that because we knew that they were waiting for us to come to the table and offer support, and we did. So in this budget, we are putting the framework in for a 12% carbon capture utilization and storage tax credit. And so we have moved on that. As I understand it, there's still some lack of clarity at the federal level about what that ITC will look like. We think it should include enhanced oil recovery, because that allows for the CO2 to be used in a profitable way in order to be able to pay for the project, which will accelerate the project. And as well, contract for differences is, I think they've made some initial strides on that, but that is another area that I'm understanding that the companies need a bit more clarity on. We've put together a working group of our ministers to meet regularly with the Pathways group to see what we can do to assist in moving that project to the finish line. I think we're just putting our terms of reference together right now, but we're committed as well to meeting with them on at least a monthly basis to make sure that we're able to keep the lines of communication open. We think this is a really important project. There'll be, I believe, 20 different oil sands companies that will ultimately put CO2 into this pipeline once it's complete. And we remain very hopeful that they'll be able to get to a final investment decision and start ordering the pipe to be able to start the project.
Just to follow up, I've got a bit of a twofold question here then. Premier, just to be clear, what did the Prime Minister say regarding the Pathways Alliance and, I guess, their support or, I guess, their views on the project? That's the first part of the question. The second one was, did you actually ask the Prime Minister to replace the Environment Minister, and did you get a response from the Prime Minister on that front?
Well, I got a smile. I think he knows that that Minister Guilbeault is not my favorite minister, but I did let him know that I have a great relationship with several of his other ministers, but I did feel like I should tell him in person what I've been saying publicly, just so that there wasn't any miscommunication on that. I do feel like our relationship would be greatly improved if we had a different point person in that file who was a little more pragmatic and someone who was willing to work with us, like some of the other ministers are. I have a strong sense that the federal government is quite keen to be able to see that project move forward. We still have to work with the Pathways Group to understand exactly what some of the barriers are to making those decisions. But I would hope that with the budget, if we can get some clarity about what the ITC looks like, get a little more clarity on contracts for differences, that I would be hopeful we would see a final investment decision before the end of the year. I'm just going as you are on some of what I've heard from the Pathways Group, that they feel there's still a lack of certainty in the long term about the support for the project, whether or not contracts for differences is going to be enough to allow them to defray some of their costs.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. Operator, can you put through the next caller, please?
Carrie Day, Club and Mail.
Hi, Premier. Thanks for taking my question. It's on the Pharmacare again. I'm wondering, with the idea of covering contraceptive and diabetes for that 24% or 26% of people who do not have coverage, why would that not be a good starting point and sort of expand from there? Why are you sort of all or none?
Well, I guess the way I look at it is when somebody signs up to a drug plan, they want the drug plan to cover what their particular ailment is, as opposed to what the government thinks that their ailment ought to be covered. And so that's my concern, is that as I made the comment, my dad has 7 different drugs that he's on our Blue Cross plan. He's not on insulin, and he doesn't need birth control. So for someone like him, it wouldn't be very helpful to have only insulin and birth control covered. He would need those 7 other conditions covered. And I suspect the vast majority of Albertans are in the same boat, that many people, when they're on medication, don't just need it for one thing. And so why not take a program that we currently have that covers 5,000 different types of drugs, including the drugs that the Prime Minister is concerned about, birth control and diabetes, and then just find a way to expand it to the people who currently don't have coverage. That just seems to be a bit more of a sensible approach, as opposed to taking a piecemeal approach.
And did you put that to the Prime Minister, and did he seem open to that idea, or was he dug in on the idea of contraceptive and diabetes only?
Look, I mean, I think we all know how expensive this is going to be. If you had a comprehensive Pharmacare program that covered every molecule from first dollar, I think it's a $40 billion program, and they simply don't have the money for that. And so I think there's sort of some practical reality that we have to work together on this. We have demonstrated that we've put together a plan that can cover a far greater range of drugs, including the drugs that he's concerned about. And so if we can find a way to expand the existing plan we have to more people, that would seem to me to be the best way to move forward. So I've asked my health minister if she would work with her counterpart on that kind of approach, and we'll see where we get to.
Thanks, Carrie. Operator, can you put through the next caller, please?
Sheila Gunreed, Global News. Rebel News.
Hi, Premier. Justin Trudeau walked out of his press conference or his meeting with you today and told the media that he had full confidence in his environment minister, and he rejected your calls to fire him. He then blamed you and the other premiers for being the caustic or problematic ones in the relationship with Guilbeault. How do you respond to that?
Well, it's, admirable that he's defending that member of his team, but I think that the reality is somewhat different. We've got an environment minister who's lost in court on the Impact Assessment Act, and rather than accept that, seems to be trying to find a workaround on it. Lost on plastics, rather than accept that, is appealing it. We went to COP, didn't tell any of the delegations there what he was going to announce there, dropped a bomb on us on an emissions cap for oil and gas, emissions cap for methane, and has basically announced that he doesn't want to build any more roads anymore, which he had to walk back. So I would say that the evidence demonstrates that there's an environment minister who has been given a pretty free rein to trample the Constitution and interfere with national unity and also interfere with investment. And so I would say that we are responding to the fact that we have an environment minister that is not following the rules, and I'm going to keep pushing back against that. I will work with the ministers that I can and hopefully find a workaround, but it would be a lot more constructive, a relationship, if we actually had somebody who was pragmatic on the other side of the table.
Were there any discussions today with Trudeau of your recently announced slate of policies to ban medical gender transition of children under the age of 16 and to protect women's sports? Because when you first announced these policies, it was all the entire federal cabinet could talk about. So did he broach the subject with you today? And if so, what did he say?
He did raise it, and I also raised the recent decision of the National Health Service to move forward with banning puberty blockers for youngsters. And I just said, look, we've got to follow the international evidence here. We're going to take a bit of a review of our current medical practices in Alberta. We've got to make sure that young people are getting a full diagnosis of gender dysphoria and have proper provisions for how to support them through that process with mental health counseling and medical support. And so we just have to make sure that there's some rigor around that process. I think you probably saw the CBC French story where they went to a gender clinic in Quebec and hired a 14-year-old actress who was able to get testosterone in a 10-minute appointment. If that is happening on a broad scale, that doesn't seem to have the rigor I think most people would expect around medical procedures. So we don't know the extent to which that might be occurring here, but we do know that these are decisions that are adult decisions to be made. And we can't be having a situation where a young child is making a decision that is going to lock them into a particular path that will affect their fertility without understanding the full impacts of that. So we're looking and taking guidance from the medical profession internationally, and I hope that we can find some common ground. We want to support anyone in their journey to become who they're going to be, but we want to make sure that they're doing so with the full understanding of what those consequences might be.
Thank you, Sheila, and that's all the time we have for questions today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.